Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee. It's Tuesday, March 9th. Right now, we have just today's bills and Thursday's bills. There may be a few stragglers next week. Today, we are dealing with property tax issues and election law issues. We do have, in fact, 19 bills on our agenda for today, but I don't suspect it will be actually very long. We're supposed to start with a bill from Delegate Acevero, but I don't see him here. Oh, there he is. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, Delegate Gabriel Acevero here to present House Bill 1120. Colleagues, in deciding whether to file this bill, a number of questions sort of crossed my mind, questions that I think as legislators, we should all be contemplating. And among those questions were, one, why should golf courses get special treatment while millions of Marylanders are struggling to cover basics like food and shelter? Why should the few privileged enough to take advantage of golf courses enjoy additional privilege at the expense of the many who struggle to make ends meet? And really, I couldn't find any meaningful justification to keep this favorable tax treatment, which is what it is. And so House Bill 1120, if it were to pass, the only result would be the owners of small golf courses having to pay more in state and local property taxes. Again, owners of golf courses would be required to, in essence, pay what they otherwise would pay. Keep in mind that the genesis of this special tax treatment, even though some folks would like to make the case that this was really done in order to preserve open space, green space, etc., this bill really, in essence, rewards folks and rewards discrimination. And I'll expound on that a little bit more. The genesis, as I mentioned, of this special tax treatment that House Bill 1120 is seeking to repeal was not in response to golf courses paying an unfair share of property taxes. Rather, this favorable tax treatment was to incentivize private golf courses throughout the state to not discriminate, right? Clubs agreeing not to restrict membership based on gender, race, nationality, or religion could qualify for property tax assessments. And so in virtually every other facet of our society, we penalize with sticks those who choose to discriminate on such arbitrary basis. In this instance, however, we are offering carrots in the form of special tax treatment to that essentially says that we will give you more for basically doing the absolute minimum. And so what we also hear is that this special tax treatment is necessary in order to promote open space that would otherwise be used for development. And preservation of open space is a particularly cruel justification given the housing crisis that we as a state are currently facing. But indeed, restricting land for development ensures that supply will remain low even as demand continues to grow, resulting in higher housing costs and more struggle for those who are least able to withstand it. So what we're talking about here is private open spaces, not public, private spaces. Country club members who are benefiting far more than non-members, and really folks who see this as an issue of fairness. Perhaps most important is, I noted, it's noted rather that with the passage of this bill, it would result in almost 5 million increase in local property tax revenue. And if your office, like mine, has received a number of emails from constituents, from folks across our state, struggling to make ends meet, sort of teetering on the edge of economic ruin, I think we have a responsibility as legislators, really as stewards of the public dollar to ensure that we're not just finding innovative ways to raise revenue for state coffers, but we're also ensuring that our tax code and our tax system is fair and it is equitable. And I think anyone that looks at this special treatment that we offer for golf courses and country clubs, it is contrary to a fair and equitable tax system. And instead, what we are doing is rewarding people for not discriminating. And I don't think that is the basis for, that should be the basis for any special tax treatment. So this bill, House Bill 1120, which seeks to address that, would ensure that we are not just bringing in revenue to state and local coffers, but we're ending this special tax treatment, and we're sending a clear message that we would not reward discrimination, that everyone is expected to pay their fair share of taxes like everyone else. And whenever an entity or an individual does not pay their fair share of taxes, it means that money that we would otherwise get in order to fund priorities like social services, in order to help those most vulnerable in our community, that is millions of dollars that we are losing in order to address these very pressing issues. And so colleagues, House Bill 1120 is designed to address that. It is designed to ensure that we are bringing more funds into state and local coffers, and we're ending sort of this practice that has been really untenable, and also a bad example, quite frankly, that we're giving special tax treatment so that folks wouldn't discriminate. So with that, I would urge a favorable report because I think this is one of those issues where really there's no justification for it. It was a bill that was requested by a constituent of mine, but I would argue that the concern that my constituents shared about this special tax treatment for country clubs, golf courses, et cetera, is a concern that is equally shared by all of our constituents, regardless of where they live in our state. House Bill 1120 seeks to address that. It is the right thing to do, and it is the first step in our broader conversation about how we make our state's tax code more fair, more equitable, and sort of ending these special treatments for a privileged few, and instead demanding that they not only pay their fair share, but then that we take those revenue and we invest it into the programs that will help the many. So with that, colleagues, I urge a favorable report, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. Any questions for the delegate? All right. Seeing none, I will see if there's anybody signed up to testify. 1 second, please. I think there is 1 or 2. Give me a moment. Susan Rogers.
Yes, hi. Can I go ahead, Ann?
Please do.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, delegates. My name is Susan Rogers, and I'm speaking in favor of House Bill 1120. I'm a member of DSA and a resident in Montgomery County, where there is the highest concentration of wealth in private country clubs in our state. As a homeowner who pays yearly property taxes, I'm deeply disturbed with the high tax write-off that country clubs have been given for many years to help protect the recreational lifestyle of the elite in our state. I've discussed the assessment of my land for tax purposes with my real estate agent. I live on approximately 1/8 of an acre, which has been assessed for property taxes at approximately $304,000. This would mean that in my neighborhood, land is assessed at approximately $2,430,000 per acre. By contrast, the taxable value of raw land of the golf course of nearby Columbia Country Club is assessed at just $1,000 per acre. This means that I pay approximately 2,430 times more than what one of the richest country clubs in the United States pays in property taxes. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what else to call this than class warfare. More importantly, while these elite clubs enjoy a tax break, that accounts for, I see Delegate Severo said 5 million. I understood it was $10 million in yearly revenue for my county. Maryland faces a nearly $1 billion budget shortfall and a slashing of $413 million in funding for public services. Instead of making these country club owners pay their fair share, this means that the state and counties will have to make up the difference by cutting important services for the working class in our state, including schools, hospitals, and public transportation. In my opinion, this is unconscionable. I ask you, when you run for re-election, do you really want to be on record for appealing this bill in one of the most historic periods of deficit in our state and country? You will hear other arguments at this hearing against this bill that, in my opinion, are largely based on fear. Country clubs could go out of business. They would have to lay off staff. It would result in neighborhood sprawl. But there is no real proof that paying an equitable land tax would lead to these results. With Columbia Country Club reporting up to $15 million in annual revenue, there is no real grounding in these arguments. You may also hear that the tax exemption would preserve the land and is a good green thing to do. But I ask you, preserved land for whose recreation? Certainly not for the masses of working people in my state. So thank you very much, delegates, for your time and your consideration of my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. We next have Frank Fritz.
Hello, delegates. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Kaiser, and to all the delegates for receiving my testimony in favor of HB 1120. To start off, I just want to quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that in the United States of America, we have socialism for the rich and free enterprise for the poor. And when you look at the disparities caused by our tax policies, this bill really addresses just one of the tips of the iceberg. In Montgomery County alone, this subsidy has estimated an estimated impact of disinvesting $10 million a year from our local government in favor of these large elite institutions that we call country clubs. If you compare that $10 million a year, Montgomery County spends on its entire population of 1 million residents only $46 million a year on public recreation. You could use that $10 million to double youth development recreation programs, or you could quadruple the funding for senior citizen recreational fundraising, funding for senior citizen recreational programming. This shows the disparity in our society that is exacerbated by our tax code. This is not asking for any kind of progressive taxation on these clubs, and I want to reiterate that. We are not here today to say that country clubs should pay more than working families, but that they should simply pay the same rate as everyone else and play by the same market rules as everyone else, and balance their budgets in the same way that working families in this county have to, and pay their fair share to make sure that we do not have to cut even deeper into our public services, into our world-class education system, or into the transit and housing infrastructure that we need in this county. I'll just conclude by saying that budgets are, I don't need to tell you all, but that budgets are a reflection of our values. And if we choose to invest in private recreation that is not open to all of our citizens, what kind of message are we sending to the people of this state? In this time where so many people, so many frontline workers have sacrificed so much to keep our state moving, are we willing to say that the wealthiest among us, the upper crust of our society, should not pay just the same rate as everyone else? If you believe that they should pay the same rate as everyone else, I ask you to vote in favor of this bill. But if you think that you want to continue to protect the privilege and the power of these elite institutions, you will hear an argument for that coming up next. And I urge you to once again remember, the holistic impact of these policies that they've had over time. And if you have any better use for $10 million in your budget, to vote yes on this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Are there any questions for either person who testified? All right, thank you both very much. We'll next
Thank you
go
very
to
much, Madam
PJ
Chair.
Hogan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Kaiser, Vice Chairman Washington, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is PJ Hogan on behalf of the Coalition of Clubs. We are opposed to House Bill 1120. I realize you have 19 bills on your hearing list. I've submitted written testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions. Those of the members on this committee from Montgomery County have heard this issue time and time again over the last couple of years. And even there have been statewide bills such as this in the past that have all been defeated. I want to point out something in particular. Last year, in an effort to try to come to some resolution on this issue, the Coalition of Clubs and the legislature, legislative leadership, included a provision in the Budget and Reconciliation and Financing Act that will increase the tax assessment on the property used as a golf course from $1,000 an acre to $5,000 an acre over the next triennial, the 3-year period. And it puts in place an inflation index going forward. This was something that both sides agreed to, and a bill like this really in many ways violates that agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions that others may have. I'm not going to go point by point. You have my written testimony.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hogan. Any questions for Mr. Hogan? Start with Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Hogan, I appreciate your comment. And I'm not sure of the agreement. When was an agreement reached? What year was that?
The one I referenced about raising it from 1,000 to 5,000 last year in the 2020 BRFA. Yes.
So there's 2 more years left on that agreement?
No, that was the change in the law. The law changed and raised it. It will raise it from $1,000 an acre assessed value to 5,000 during the next triennial assessment. You know how your everybody's property is reassessed, triennially. And let me just point out that the only property that is subject to this special treatment is the land of the golf course, not any other buildings, not any of the ancillary buildings, clubhouse, things like that. Those are taxed at the full investment value.
All right, thank you.
All right, any additional questions for Mr. Hogan? Did you have more, Delegate Barnes?
No, Madam Chair, I'm taking my hand down now.
All right, Delegate Polakovich-Carr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hogan, for being here to answer questions. So you raised in your testimony the potential issue of clubs closing because of this, but I'm kind of scratching my head over that because DLS estimates that the cost statewide is only $4.8 million a year. Your own testimony mentions about how the clubs are collectively paying more than $400 million a year in just wages and salaries. That doesn't include all the other expenses that they have. But so, I mean, 4.8 million seems like a relatively small cost, compared to the other costs these clubs already are incurring, certainly less than 1%. So I'm just trying to rectify there how you're threatening that clubs are going to close over such a small amount of money.
Not threatening. I'm just saying it is a possibility. I'll highlight that in 1 second. And as you know, the fiscal notes by DLS, they are static. They are just, okay, if we tax an acre of land at this versus what it is now, this is what it will collect. They make no estimate on change in economic situation. What I was pointing out was that, there are a lot of employees that work at these clubs. One was cited earlier about, well, Columbia Country Club makes X. I don't want to single people out. Like Argyle Country Club is much, much smaller. Could easily, I mean, they don't do well. I mean, are they still open? Yes. but Kenwood Country Club is actually owned by a single, family. It was started by a family, whereas the other clubs are owned by the members. The family that owns Kenwood, that land is worth a fortune. They could sell that land and that family would never have to work a day in their life. But they choose to keep it as a golf course. It's a third generation golf course. Especially in Montgomery County, a lot of these courses are in already very highly densely populated areas. If a course like Woodmont closed, that's a large swath. That's about 270 acres between I-270 and 355. That if it was developed, there is no way the roads and schools could handle that kind of development.
All right, we have a next question. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask Delegate Havzair, is he familiar with Sparrows Point Country Club? Hello?
Delegate, are you still here?
I'm sorry, is that a question? That was a question for me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I didn't hear my name. Sorry about that. Yes.
All right, sorry about it. I might have mispronounced it. I said, are you familiar with Sparrows Point Country Club?
I'm not. No, I'm not familiar with country clubs. I don't frequent country clubs, no.
I don't either, but Sparrows Point Country Club's in my district, and it is actually going up for, it's been foreclosed on, and I think it's probably back on taxes also because of the cost of running the country club and the decline in membership. People only have so much money to play golf or whatever. And anyway, make a long story short, that's what, they're having a tough time and they're going to lose a lot of jobs down there. They actually come in to do a development on the property, which, is not the greatest thing, but, they're trying to keep the rest of the club open. So not all country clubs are making a lot of money. Would you agree? I mean, would you agree that some country clubs are struggling right now?
Delegate, I can't speak to that because I don't have access to country clubs' books.
Okay.
Nor do I do their accounting. But what I do know is that a lot of Marylanders are struggling right now. And I think we got to find innovative ways to fund the very important services and help that we're going to be providing for those Marylanders. And this is a piece of that.
Right. Well, I just was wondering if you were familiar with Sparrows Point Country Club.
I'm not, but I'd love to take a visit to your district one day, Delegate Long, perhaps.
Well, if you come, just come on down. We'll be more than glad to show you around.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions for the delegate or his panel? All right, thank you all. Seeing no more questions, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 1120. We move on to House Bill 1290, Delegate Ampry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Delegate Marlon Ampry here to speak in support of House Bill 1290, State Department of Assessments and Taxation, Real Property Assessments and Appeals. The bill has also been cross-filed with my Senator Antonio Hayes, as Senate Bill 782. House Bill 1290 will require the SDAT to publish a plain language description of its assessment process on its website and to ensure that property owners understand the process. This will get rid of the confusing and secretive process of how the state assesses the value of property. The bill allows appeal authorities to consider more criteria than just market sales in the appeals process, making assessments more fair and more equitable. As of right now, only the market sales near a home are used in the assessment process. And we know that due to recent understandings and recent reporting across this nation, we understand how inequitable the assessment process has been, particularly for people of color, and this connection to home values. And we know that is a major component of how people build wealth. And it's important that we have a more equitable and clear way in which we are assessing home values. Currently, the way the system is set up, it really benefits developers and those who have cash on hand to go into communities, renovate homes, renovate properties, and therefore those who are trying to take part in that, who don't have some of those things, there's not equitable access to ensure that they have the same ability to build more wealth. So what this bill will do was require SDAT to adhere to the IRS real property valuation guidelines under Part 4 of the IRS manual, and to lower the minimum value of property improvements or renovations that trigger a mid-cycle reevaluation from $100,000 to $50,000, just so that there's more opportunities for there to be a better reevaluation process. So the current laws in place are, have really resulted in more confusion among property owners and wildly unfair property value assessments between two nearly identical properties. One of my constituents is Ms. Scott, who will speak to her own experiences. The federal guidelines were built in order to prevent inequity and miscarriages of justice. And when we need to make sure that SDAT is adhering to these guidelines. Finally, to promote equality and economic inclusivity into the minimum value of property improvements and renovations that trigger a mid-cycle evaluation must be lowered so that we can include all Marylanders in that process. The current system that we have is just not fair. And honestly, it was one of the few systems in this country that operates the way in which it does. There's not, the assessment process doesn't allow for there to be a better opportunity for those evaluating the homes to look inside the home and understand what other items have taken place inside the home to increase the property value. They're only able to go by and look at just the facade and do a quick inspection, which is just it's not fair, it's not equitable. And you'll hear again from Ms. Scott, who will talk about her issues with the system that's how it's currently set up. And we really need to fix this problem and make it more equitable and make it more make it so that everyone can really see every step of the process, so everyone has access to building equity and everyone has access to building wealth. So I asked for a favorable report on HB 1290, and I'll take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Ampry. And we do have 2 people signed up, but does anyone have any questions for Delegate Ampry? All right. Seeing no questions, we'll take the 2 people who are signed up. We'll start with Lisa Scott.
Chair Kaiser and members of the Ways and Means Committee, my name is Lisa Scott. Thank you for allowing me to present testimony in support of House Bill 1290. My testimony today will be high level, so allow me to draw your attention to my written testimony, which documents the problems with SDAT's appeal and assessment processes in more detail. When I received my property assessment notice in 2019, I was shocked by the fact that the assessed values of all my immediate neighbors, the other center unit properties on my side of the block, were not assessed along the same lines. In fact, their assessed values are $107,000 to $147,000 lower than mine. That's quite odd when you consider that all the center units are nearly identical, and some should be legitimately valued higher than mine, considering one is a multi-unit property and others have undergone extensive renovations for the permit records. The main problems I see with the assessment process are: 1, it's a black box. Nowhere can you find information about how market value is determined, nor any information about all the other factors that affect assessment. 2, the assessment process clearly is not uniform, as my case demonstrates. 3, SDAT is not in compliance with IRS property valuation guidelines. And 4, assessments benefit the wealthy because those with the means to purchase and renovate property might never have those renovations taken into account. The main problem I see with the appeal process is that by restricting arguments to only market sales, this does not allow for errors in assessments to be addressed. SDAT can always find a high sale to use as justification for an assessment, thereby effectively absolving them of any accountability for errors and inequities. And as the judge in Maryland tax court told me, issues with the assessment methodology can only be addressed through legislation. If my assessment is somehow fair, which I do not concede, I have no problem paying those taxes. However, I do have a problem if others aren't paying their fair share. I suspect no one in this hearing would be okay with a market conductor charging you $8 for your ticket to DC and $2 for everyone else on your side of the aisle. It's legal but unjust. The stakes are much higher when it comes to property taxes, where the discrepancies are measured in thousands of dollars. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
All right, and thank you. And we next have testifying Kevin Canelli. Kevin, are you here? All right, that officially becomes Kevin's shortest testimony, but he only had to beat 20 seconds. All right, any questions for Ms. Scott? All right. Thank you very much. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1290.
Thank you.
We're moving next to House Bill 1311 from Delegate Mangione, and we have, I believe, his staff member, Mike Calva, here.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I am Michael Calva, Chief of Staff for Delegate Nino Mangione, and I'm sitting here today representing Delegate Mangione for House Bill 1311. He's currently in judiciary testifying for two other bills. Last month, Delegate Mangione had already presented a similar bill in front of this committee, and that bill detailed a 5-year period for the surviving spouses to apply for the tax exemption. House Bill 1311, on the other hand, is a cross-file of Senator Ellis's Senate Bill 269, which details a 3-year period for their surviving spouses to apply for their tax exemption. And just wanted to note that Senator Ellis's version passed the Senate unanimously 46-0 last year, but it did not come to the House for a vote due to ending early for COVID. And we've also not received any opposition to this bill. So I just want to make this brief. So thank you for your time, and I urge you to give House Bill 1311 a favorable report. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You tell Delegate Mangione to send you next time again.
All right.
Nice job. Nice job. Any questions for the young man? All right, seeing no questions and there's no other witnesses on this bill, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 1311. Is Delegate Boyce here for House Bill 1320?
Yes, Chair Kaiser, I am.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much and good afternoon. Chair Kaiser and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I am Regina T. Boyce, delegate of the 43rd District, presenting HB 1320, Baltimore City Property Taxes Authority to Set Special Rates. HB 1320 authorizes Baltimore City to set special property tax rates for any class or subclass of real property subject to the city's property tax beginning June 30th, 2021. The purpose of HB 1320 is to provide the city with the ability to diversify how it taxes different classifications of real property. At its own admission, the Department of Finance stated that the city is always looking for ways to diversify its property tax base, especially if the goal is to reduce property tax rate, and more importantly, for those who find the tax rate an obstacle to be in our city. This bill would enable the city to begin exploring this option to reduce the property tax rate. So in my birth home of Washington, D.C., their real property tax rates are based on these classifications. So classifications are properties, of course, grouped by their similar use. For instance, classification of property would be a residential or a commercial or an industrial, open space, vacant or blighted. D.C. has 4 such classifications, but 3 subsections under their class 2 rate. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. So of course, their first class rate is for residential and multifamily housing. Their first subsection of class 2 is any property, commercial, industrial, or hotels that are below a $5 million assessment. The second class classification is the same type of property, but valued at between 5 million and 10 million. And then the second classification is the same type of property, but valued over $1 million. And then they've got a third classification of vacant property, and then a fourth classification of blighted property. And each one is at a different rate. Baltimore City has the highest property tax at 2.264% in the state, along with one of the highest rates of poverty at 21.87%. We carry the region's poor and tax our residents at the highest rate. Baltimore City is in a place where people want to be, but most importantly, where people want to live. According to Live Baltimore, in 2020, during a global pandemic, the city sold more homes, 9,476, than in the previous year in 2019 at 9,213. But most importantly, more homes were sold in 2020 than in any year in the last 10 years. The city needs any successful tool that will attract new residents and businesses. DC and its suburb counterpart, Montgomery County, has the lowest residential property tax rate and lower property rates. Due to low real property taxes, DC residents and their families tend to have the lowest overall tax burden in the metropolitan area. And I believe this is something Baltimore City can begin to achieve as well. I thank the Ways and Means Committee for your time and your consideration and urge a favorable report of HB 1320.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Boyce?
Also, Madam Chair, want to note that this is, you should have received a letter from the Baltimore City delegation, which supports this bill, as well as the Baltimore City Council President, Nick Mosby, and Mayor Brandon Scott. So I wanted to just make that known.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Right, if not, thank you, Delegate Boyce. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1320. We move next to House Bill 1324 from Delegate Pat Young. We do have at least one of the people here from ECM right now, but we're supposed to have three, but we're going to move forward. Delegate Adams, Delegate Queen, Delegate Wilson, this jointly filed bill. Delegate Young, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Delegate Young for the record. Happy to introduce HB 1324, tobacco tax out of sales premium cigar and pipe tobacco program. So before I get started, just let folks know that I'm not only happy, I'm excited to share. Not only is it about collecting taxes and fixing some, but also about collecting taxes on tobacco. So with that, what this bill does provides. This bill establishes licensing requirements for remote out-of-state tobacco sellers. Accordingly, a person located outside of Maryland must be a licensed remote tobacco seller in order to sell cigars or pipe tobacco to customers in the state. An applicant for a remote tobacco seller license must identify the premium cigars and pipe tobacco that the applicant intends to sell and ship into the state, utilize third-party age verification for purchases and deliveries, and consent to being subject to the state tobacco tax. This bill would further specify administrative procedures regarding the issuing, denial, and revocation of licenses, as well as the monitoring and enforcement of the bill, and makes various clarifying changes to tobacco tax provisions as they apply to out-of-state sellers. Additionally, the Comptroller's Office advises that it can implement the bill's provisions without, with existing budget resources. Overall, this legislation would institute measures that more effectively regulate and distribute the sale of tobacco products in the state of Maryland, and provide a mechanism by which the state can track where and from where Marylanders are purchasing premium cigars and tobacco products. So with that, thank you for your consideration of HB 1324. I urge a favorable report and take any questions. I also have some panel members as well.
All right, thank you, Delegate Young. Any questions for Delegate Young? All right, thank you. Let me call the first two. I'm sorry, did somebody have a question?
Delegate Barnes and Delegate Buckle.
Oh, excellent. Delegate Barnes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Young, does the tax also include on menthol as well?
If it's already applied, then I'd say yes. I mean, I can get a clear answer for you, since this is just applying to premium cigar and tobaccos. If that's included, I don't think it's necessarily measured because it's already covered by the statute, but I can get a clear answer for you, Delegate.
You can find out for sure for me. That'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Buckle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my friend Delegate Young, these are kind of the bills that sometimes I always struggle a little bit with, because I think that the intent, or part of the intent of the bill, is that this puts in-state retailers, cigar sellers, on the same footing with respect to how the tax is being applied to those who are selling out of state through a website or a mail service, something like that. Is that fair to say?
I say that's fair to say, yes.
Okay, so I really like that part of it. So you're treating similar business entities similarly, and you're helping our in-state folks who pay property taxes and have employees and very good things for the state. By the same token, would this bill have the effect for people who currently order their cigars, their premium products through these out-of-state vendors? Would it have the effect of potentially increasing their costs if the out-of-state vendor now is not completely in compliance with passing through the tax?
So I'll say that it's not the intent, and obviously I appreciate the question, and that I don't want to go into too much hypothetical.
Right.
My understanding is that one, working with the comptroller and with the advocates on this, and to your first point, making it a level, that if there is additional costs that an out-of-state seller needs to take on, or even if they're out of compliance, from my experience and my understanding is that I don't see how it would be a long-term effect where they would need to apply it to their sales to in-state vendors if you may.
That makes, yeah, no, I'm understanding that. Yeah, I mean, that's just my only consideration. I think it's very well intentioned to protect and help our in-state folks and apply things fairly. I just always wondered what would have a consequence of the consumer's end cost going up. But I appreciate your consideration of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Delegate Young? I'll call up the first two in favor. Brett Liniger, and following him, Mark Triplett. Mr. Liniger, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. Brett Liniger, testifying in support of House Bill 1324 on behalf of the Cigar Association of America, and thank you to Delegate Young for being our sponsor. So this bill, just by way of background, is a result of legislation that the General Assembly passed in 2019, which required online premium cigar establishments to pay excise tax as provided in Section 12-302 of the tax general article. When my client went to go through the implementation of complying with the legislation passed in 2019, they came across some challenges based on the distribution differences in their distribution model as opposed to the brick and mortar stores, and saw it with the comptroller's office and through narrative language in the Joint Chairman's report to study this issue. And this is not limited to Maryland. This is going on across the country, and try to craft a solution to the calculation challenge or problem, and create some kind of model legislation. So through the interim, my client worked with various state comptrollers' offices to develop a model framework, and Maryland is the first state to address this within this legislative session. So we have this bill before you that is the product of that exercise at the national level, as well as dealing with the comptroller's office. And there is also, we've had conversations with the Maryland Association for the brick and mortar premium cigar companies, and about some clarification language that I think we'll be able to resolve tomorrow, and going through that process. I have Mark Triplett here, who has been leading that charge on the national level as a tax expert and can get more into the weeds. With that, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leininger. Mr. Triplett?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mark Triplett. I'm here today on behalf of the Premium Cigar Coalition, which is actually a subset of the Cigar Association of America. And I'm here speaking in favor of House Bill 1324, which actually implements specifically the remedies stated in the comptroller's report dated February 8th, that that Brett referred to earlier. I also want to state that this bill does three very important things from my perspective as the drafter of the model legislation. The bill provides the comptroller with the tools that they need to actually validate the actual tax base, which is the biggest hurdle that we found all across the country, is to get both the taxing agency and the taxpayer on the same page so that they can validate the tax base. They know that they're paying on the proper amount. And in knowing that they are paying on the proper amount as a tax base, that gives them a clear path to compliance in the state, so that these out-of-state companies, which are hard to audit, will be in a situation that they can easily communicate to the comptroller what that taxable value should be in advance of the sale, and the mystery is taken out of the whole prospect of an audit dealing with the tax base. The third thing that this bill does that is very important to our effort nationwide is, as Brett referred to, Maryland is the first state to actually pass a bill or consider a bill under the model legislation framework. We drafted a framework outline that's being used and being introduced across the country. Because of the history of the comptroller's office in this issue, working on it since 2019, the comptroller was very well informed as to what the problems were that we were trying to solve. And then when we presented the possible solutions to the problem, they were very productive in terms of giving us feedback and getting the language in the proper position so it actually could be introduced as a bill. Finally, as Brett also mentioned, we have a meeting tomorrow morning to settle some issues that have to do with really semantics. We believe we'll have those settled tomorrow and the sign off by the comptroller not long after that. So I would appreciate all the hard work of the comptroller's office on this matter, and would ask for your support of 1324.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Leininger, you had referenced a report from the comptroller's office. Can you share that with us via email?
I can, and I believe it was submitted with our written testimony. But yes, it was. I see Mr. Ward referencing that. So there's the written one pager, and then it should be immediately following that shows the comptroller.
I see it now. Okay. I just didn't scroll down far enough. Thank you.
Sure. No problem.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming in and your testimony today. That concludes the bill hearing. Next up is
Delegate Barnes?
Yes.
I am still sitting here for the moment before I run off for a few minutes. There were two people signed up favorable with amendment.
Yes.
So I apologize. The first is Matt Boley, and then the second is Finney Helmuth.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Matthew Boley of Rifkin Weiner Livingston, here on behalf of the Premium Cigar Retailers Association of Maryland. The association consists of over 30 adult-only brick-and-mortar premium cigar retailers. We thank the sponsor for bringing this bill, and we support HB 1324 with an amendment. Our concern regarding HB 1324 is limited to subsection 2 of page 11. We're concerned that this subsection, as introduced, may create an opportunity for out-of-state premium cigar sellers to potentially avoid paying the wholesale tax in Maryland. The subsection states that if the actual price paid for a cigar by an out-of-state seller is not available, then the average of the actual price paid over the previous 12-month calendar period is applied for the wholesale tax. If the price paid is unknown, how is the comptroller necessarily going to be able to make this assessment? Or what happens if there's a unique or special product line where the product hasn't been sold previously and an average prior price cannot be determined? We suggest that clarifying language be included to indicate that subsection 1 on page 11 is the default option, and subsection 2 may be used if subsection 1 is not practical and the comptroller permits the usage. We have been working with the bill proponents and the comptroller's office to come up with an approach and language that may better resolve our concerns. Again, we support this bill, and have limited concerns on this one subsection. We want to iron out this difference and to ensure that the tax on out-of-state cigars is correctly assessed and collected. With that, we request this bill be considered favorable with amendment.
Are there any questions? Delegate Lukie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Boley, Mr. Leininger, this may be for either or both of you. So, I mean, I presume every state is going to be dealing with these same challenges in the post-Wayfair world. And I understand this is based on model legislation, but have there been conversations about sort of a more formal interstate compact or you know, work at the sort of tobacco enforcement? I assume there's an organization of tobacco and state tobacco enforcement offices. I mean, it would seem to me that, you know, to the extent we could standardize this, it'd be better for the states and for the industry.
Delegate, if it's okay, and with Mr. Chairman, Mr. Triplett may be best to respond to that.
Sure, that'd be fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, in fact, model legislation that is part of the agenda of the Federation of Tax Administrators Uniformity Committee. Okay. And so we're working with them. It will be posted on the website. In fact, if the Maryland bill passes, the Maryland bill will be posted on the website as the first legislation to implement it. And what we did was we drafted an outline to be able to draft a bill from that outline. And included in the first section the intent of the legislation. So it's meant to be instructive to the legislature. We're not going to get exactly the same language in every state. We know that. But particularly in the area of establishing the tax base and giving the taxpayer a path to compliance. Those are the two big issues that the more uniform those two can be, both the licensure piece and the actual establishment of the tax base can be, the better off we're all going to be in terms of implementing this thing. And it's going to allow the state to collect more tax than they would otherwise.
Right. Well, I agree completely. I mean, clearly Maryland's language is going to be better than any other state, but I appreciate that.
Thank you. This bill is jointly assigned with Economic Matters. Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is just basically on the amendment, Matt, that you mentioned, maybe the sponsor. Is that something you all are working towards resolving or?
Yes. So the amendment that we submitted, unfortunately, with the sign-up system, I had to submit our amendment on Friday. So that's actually not the most current iteration, of what we have available. We've been working with the proponents in the comptroller's office, and we have another meeting tomorrow morning. And, I agree with their sentiment that, we're not that far off. I think we had the same intent as there. So I think we're going to be able to work something out. If not, we certainly leave it to the discretion of this committee to make the correct decision.
And we have been discussing and just want to make sure that we're fighting with that, and we're looking for a resolution. We'll inform the committee when we have one as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
There was one more person signed up with favorable with amendments. Fanny Helmuth. I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
You're fine. Good afternoon. My name's Feeney Helmuth. My family and I have owned and operated the Humidor Cigar Shop in Baltimore County for the last 24 years. We proudly provide our customers with premium cigars, pipe tobacco, and accessories at a fair price. I would like to thank Delegate Young for bringing this bill to the committee's attention, and I look forward to working with you on the points that Matt Foley made, and I am available for any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I believe that concludes the hearing now on House Bill 1324. Thank you, Delegate Young, for coming in. Next is House Bill 1257, Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, members of the committee. Delegate Kevin Hornberger here on behalf of HB 1257, Business Personal Property Tax, businesses affected by COVID-19 restrictions, reimbursements. This is an emergency bill, and it's the product of a work group that our caucus put together over the interim. It deals only with businesses that were negatively impacted by the governor's order for mandated shutdown. A little bit of background on the bill, and I'll talk about the fiscal analysis, and then I want to pose to you a scenario. The average, as you'll see in the fiscal note for personal property tax, is $2.67 per 100 assessed value, bringing this fiscal note in at around 365 million. Now, typically, that personal property tax is remitted to counties, and we did not want to punish the counties and have them hold harmless. So we've actually set it up to where that money would come from the rainy day fund. We do believe that there is enough money to cover that in the fund. And the scenario that I put forward is, imagine if you had a business and government comes forward and says, because of COVID, you have to shut down. Now, during that time that you are shut down, you have no revenue coming in whatsoever, especially if you're brick and mortar. In addition to no income, you're still being assessed taxes for this property that you have. And for those of the members that don't know, personal property tax includes things like refrigerators for restaurants, equipment for bars, barber's chairs, anything that you need to conduct your business that is a physical asset. So we're just asking, you'll see a letter in there from SDAT. It looks like it would be a bit of a lift for them, but it's doable. And we think that this common sense legislation will be the difference between a business being able to keep their doors open or fully succumb to COVID-19. And we ask for a favorable passage of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Hornberger? Delegate Buckle. You're on mute, Delegate Buckle.
I thought I was on mute. I said, this is a great bill that I know I'd talk to you and work with you on. I appreciate Delegate Hornberger. My question is, are you doing today's bill hearing from like your private dining room on your wealthy train that goes across the country, or you have an odd background there? I just wondered.
Yeah, I'm actually in my private jet right now, and I'll be circling back to the committee later this afternoon. But yeah, this was the closest to the dentist appointment. So thank you for that observation.
Great. So like the tax the rich guys from the prior hearing, I can let them know to come after you next. Good. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. Are there any questions for Delegate Hornberger? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on 1257. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up is Delegate Kipke, House Bill 1282.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone. House Bill 1182 is seeking to provide a remedy for a constituent of mine. You should have a amendment to this bill. I had introduced it last year, and it really wasn't the right solution. Because of code, I just had it reintroduced the same way, but I worked with your committee staff to come up with a solution for this constituent. Basically, the problem is this: they have a property with a strip, a pathway that goes through it that is owned by the original developer of the neighborhood. They want to bulldoze an old building on the property and expand the size of their house to have a parent's, they want to have their parent live with them because they're getting older, but they can't do it because this path goes through the property and is owned by this other entity. They haven't paid taxes on the property in a very long time, but the problem is before it be triggered for a tax sale, everybody will be gone, and it'll just take way too long because it's such a small parcel. So the amendment is very craftily created that speaks basically specifically to this instance, and would provide them a remedy to sort of force the county to move the property forward with the tax sale. If they don't do it this way, it's just a roadblock for them to fully utilize the property that's there, and just seems unreasonable. They've made attempts to contact the property owner, but the lady is 90 and in a nursing home, and it's just not, it's just not happening. So I'd be glad to go into any further details or provide any mapping or anything that you'd like to take a closer look at this. But I'm hopeful we can do something to help out this family. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Kipke? Delegate Long.
Thank you. Delegate Kipke, is this what they consider a spike strip?
I have never heard of that before until now, and that's exactly what it is. Yes.
developers do that a lot in Anne Arundel County, I've found, to keep things from happening, just like what you're trying to do. It's called a spike strip.
Yeah, thank you.
So Delegate Kipke, can you explain what a spike strip is?
Delegate Long may do a better job, but the way I think of it is it's a path. It's just a little walkway through a property. And in some neighborhoods in Anne Arundel County, it was used so that all the people who are on the inside of the neighborhood that are not on the water can access waterfront privileges. This isn't the case here. There's nothing like that there, and there's no homes. So maybe the developer had originally intended it that way, but it never came about. They never built those homes anywhere else. And it's just, there's no one opposed to us doing this in that community. It's just a very strange circumstance.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, that concludes the hearing on 1182. Next up is Delegate Kipke, House Bill 1343.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1343 will seek to change the way that which districts our Republican State Central Committee members run in Anne Arundel County only. There is an amendment to the bill, and there is a letter that has been submitted by the Central Committee with their support. You should also have a delegation letter. This also passed unanimously in the delegation. What the bill does with the amendment is it changes the districts from legislative districts. Right now they run in the senatorial districts. It would change it to county council districts. And to keep the numbers equal, it adds one at-large member. So it will keep the same size of the Central Committee. The reason that they seek to do this is our districts have gone outside of Anne Arundel County lately. And some of our members have very small districts. And so they just want to give everybody an equal size district to run in.
Are there any questions for Delegate Kipke? Seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on 1343.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you for coming in. Madam Chair, it's back to you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Subcommittee Chair. Appreciate your help there. We will now switch to Delegate Kipke was the bridge between taxes and election law. And now we'll go back to all election law, starting with House Bill 985, Delegate Impleria.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. This is Delegate Rick Impleria presenting House Bill HB 985. During the traumatic experience where people have seen their lives change, many in the state were talking about what do we do if we need to change out one of our representatives, such as they do in California, Wisconsin, and New York, which all have election law recalls. So this bill is election law, state official recall, and it's a very simple bill. It is for the highest ranking elected officials in the state, which would be the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the comptroller. And it's just one page. The first page just gives you a little boilerplate, but the second page is pretty much all of it. It says the filing of a petition for recall will be with the Secretary of State. So when the public decides that elected officials should be recalled, they form the petition and file it with the Secretary of State. He approves of it to go forward. Then and a petition to recall cannot happen for the first 120 days that someone's in office. So you can't say, I don't like the outcome of the election and bang, instantly do a recall. Then the next part of the bill is the requirements for the numbers, and you must have at least 25% of the number of people who voted in the most recent gubernatorial election. So you'd have to go out and collect those signatures just like on any other petition drive of voters, and it would have to be 25% or more to make the recall go forward. Then the recall would be placed with the Secretary of State. He would approve the recall, and then within 120 days, of the petition being approved, a special election would be set up for that recall. And we see in New York State right now, they are looking at a possible recall of the governor. Also, Gavin Newsom is having some issues that they might be looking to recall him. So I just think it's fair that Maryland has the same right. The citizens of Maryland have the same type of rights that many do across the United States and have the right to recall their elected officials. And the bill is very simple. It would be a constitutional amendment. It would be up to the public to decide in the end if they thought this was good and this was something they wanted. And with that, that's the bill.
Delegate Impalaria, there is another question, but I first want to ask, you mentioned in your argument in selling the bill that during these weird, crazy times due to things like COVID and the pandemic, is your bill only in those situations, or would it allow for recalls in any situation?
No, it would be any situation, but during this time, whether it be President Trump or the pandemic, you know, a lot of people question, should the Attorney General be spending the type of state funds on these lawsuits against the president? So that might be a reason. I'm not saying that is a reason, but that might be a reason that people might want to recall him. During this pandemic, you know, a lot of people feel like their constitutional rights have been stepped on, and that these executive orders have went too far with the emergency orders. And some people feel there should be a recall on that. And of course, there's always that case where someone may do something that is totally incompetent in office. They may commit a crime while in office. So this gives the people another remedy to try to straighten that out. And I think that should answer your question.
All right. Delegate Buckle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate. So, you know, you up. I just looked this up quickly on NCSL. Looks like there's about 20 other states that do this. I mean, 19 states have specific recall statutes, and then our neighbor in Virginia, it says, has a recall process. They just don't call it a recall statute. They have a way to do it. So you know, this isn't rare, and I appreciate that. The question I had was how it would work in our system where we elect the governor and lieutenant governor together. So they run as a ticket together, and your bill provides like you could remove the lieutenant governor separately or the governor separately. If we removed the governor through a recall process, did your bill provide for how we address that? So like, does the lieutenant governor immediately become governor, or do we call a separate election?
Well, number one, that's already called out in law. If something happens to the governor, the lieutenant governor
will become, right.
And that is what happened down in Virginia when they were questioned whether that governor in Virginia should be recalled. And then they found some reason that maybe the lieutenant governor should be recalled too. Now, I'm not using them as examples that they did something wrong, but they are examples of what was out there. And I'm sure if the lieutenant governor was recalled, then the governor, through the same process, would appoint a new lieutenant governor. So those laws already exist on how those offices are filled.
And my last question, I mean, your bill, you know, I kind of like the idea in a way. Your bill has a very high threshold. This isn't frivolous. 25% of the eligible voters. I mean, just looking online, most of the states' thresholds are even smaller than that. So your bill would really only allow this in these exceptional situations where a very high percentage of our voters have expressed desire. Is that fair?
Yes, that is fair. And bill drafting did a great job, because rather than me tell them the specifics of what I wanted, I asked them to research across the United States and find the simplest, most reasonable recall bill, or use what they thought was the most reasonable. They presented this to me, and I tell you, I couldn't find any reason to change it. I mean, it's a good bill. It's simple legislation. It's very readable. It's 3 pages. Like I said, 1 page, the first page is just calling out what's in law now. The second page is the recall, and the third page is just boilerplate language on how we do the constitutional amendment on the ballot. So it's very easy to understand.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Delegate Impalaria? All right. Thank you. Seeing none, we're done with the delegate, but we'll move on. Vince McAvoy, are you here to testify? Mr. McAvoy, are you here? Is he in the waiting room? All right, he's not in the waiting room. He's not here. You were
Question, was he
on
pro
the
or
right side.
con? Because I don't know who he was. Was he
Well-
for or against?
He's with you, but he might complain afterwards that I didn't call him. So we've now all had this conversation. So there you go.
Well, thank you. I hope you get a favorable on this, and it's interesting. I hope we never have to use something like this, but thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate Impalaria. The next bill we have is Delegate Williams, House Bill 1020.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. All right. Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I am Delegate Nicole Williams from District 22, and I'm testifying in favor of House Bill 1020, also known as Election Law Curbside Voting Establishment. I want to first thank Congressman Tony Kulo, who was the primary sponsor of the American Disabilities Act signed into law by President Bush, for his support of this bill and helping me bring this important legislation here to the state of Maryland, as well as Monica Wiley, a resident of Laurel, Maryland, who's also the Eastern Regional Chair for the Disability Council of the DNC and who first reached out to me about this issue. House Bill 1020 is based off of legislation from Virginia. And in Virginia, they introduced this bill back in 1998. It was House Bill 1998, introduced back in 2009, which sought to expand voting access in the state of Virginia. Our version that is presented before you here takes that initiative and expands it by including, in addition, expecting mothers and those who may not have the same ease of access as other Marylanders. And this law is not unique to just the state of Virginia. Such other states across our country, such as North Carolina, Texas, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, and others also have curbside voting. And so I'm introducing this bill in hopes of extending voting opportunities to more members of our community. Everyone should be guaranteed the right to participate in the democratic process. And in fact, voting is one of the single most effective and important things a citizen can do. And so establishing curbside voting here in Maryland will ensure that every Marylander, whether with either a permanent or temporary physical disability, will have the opportunity to exercise their vote as they wish. And so while yes, we have vote by mail here in Maryland, as well as drop boxes, there are Marylanders that do not like to vote by mail or via drop box. And some of them may actually want to physically go to a polling place and physically mark a ballot in person. And so by providing curbside voting, it will allow additional members of our community who will be able to civically engage in a manner that they feel comfortable with. And individuals should not feel that the process of casting their ballot is an inconvenience. You have before you several amendments that address a number of concerns and comments and feedback that we have received from a number of stakeholders and advocates. And so these amendments to address those concerns does limit the availability of curbside voting out of concerns raised by some of the local Board of Elections in Mako. But I hope that we will, if enacted, we will see the usefulness and success of curbside voting here in the state of Maryland and can later on down the road, expand its use. And for these reasons, I am urging the committee to give a favorable report for House Bill 1020. And I welcome any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Delegate Williams. My first question is simply, what was your conversations with the locals on implementing something like this?
Yeah, so the conversation, the feedback that we've received from the local Board of Elections is really just a concern about having the resources to implement something along those lines, which is why we did put forth the amendments to really curtail the amount of locations for curbside voting, to limit it to during the early voting period, as well as at a minimum one location on election day that can either be at the local Board of Elections or at a location so chosen by the local board in conjunction with the state board within the county, within that particular county, as a way to kind of deal with the concerns about the lack of resources in terms of manpower and things like that in implementing something like this.
Delegate, and now that you've explained that, I have a new question. My concern, and they're not always the same population, but a lot of times the people who might have that curbside need might also not have the same time or money to get across their county or their jurisdiction if you're talking then about only one place. So what is?
I share that same concern, to be quite honest with you, Chairwoman. You know, it was a way to try to find a compromise, but I do understand, especially, you know, for those who may rely on public transportation and the like. And so that's why, you know, but hopefully by providing it during the early voting period at all of the early vote locations within the county will provide at least a location that would be accessible to most residents within that county.
All right, thank you. I was watching Delegate Smith's eyes as you spoke and as I spoke, so I think she's maybe ready with a similar question. I don't know. Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing forth this bill. It's really important. I just had a small question about, can curbside voting accommodate the needs of blind voters?
Curbside voting, I guess it could. You know, in terms of I know that the National Federation of the Blind is supportive of another bill that was before you all earlier this session as it related to, I guess, the types of ballots that are available to those within the blind community. And so I know that that is a concern of theirs. What we have proposed under this bill is for the ballots to be the exact same as the ballots that any other person would cast. So you don't have that segregation concern that I know the National Federation of the Blind does have with the other voting machines that they're regulated to use currently. And so that was our kind of way of trying to address that. We have had multiple conversations with Maryland National Federation of the Blind about this bill because we did want to be sensitive about those concerns.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. This is a good bill.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Delegate Williams. Any other questions for the delegate? All right, we will next, we do have 3 people signed up to testify. We will start with Hayden Johnson.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and members of the committee. My name is Hayden Johnson, and in addition to my written testimony, I'm providing oral testimony today in support of HB 1020. I'm a voting rights lawyer at Campaign Legal Center, which is a nonprofit organization that litigates voting rights cases across the country and then complements these efforts by working with lawmakers such as yourselves to promote policies that improve access for voters. And the curbside voting reforms in House Bill 1020 would make the voting process more accessible for Marylanders in need by providing a safe and convenient method for casting their ballot. And so first, as a lawyer, I'll start with the legal framework here. And our federal law favors making democracy more accessible. Under the US Supreme Court's 1983 decision in Anderson v. Calabrese, the First and 14th Amendments of the US Constitution prohibit states from unreasonably burdening their citizens' fundamental right to vote. And courts have strongly applied the Constitution's guarantees to enforce equal access for all voters. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act also requires state and local governments to ensure that voters have equal and open access to an opportunity to vote, including voters with disabilities. And these provisions apply to all aspects of voting, including registration, polling site location, and the casting of ballots, both on election day and during the early voting period. Likewise, the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act of 1984 requires accessible polling places in federal elections for elderly individuals and people with disabilities. And then finally, the Help America Vote Act of 2002 also requires jurisdictions to provide at least one accessible method of voting per person with disabilities at each polling location. So the curbside voting provisions in HB 1020 are in keeping with these objectives in federal law. And for that reason, the U.S. Department of Justice recommends curbside voting to accommodate voters with disabilities. And for many of the same reasons, curbside voting is just good policy because it helps voters who experience additional hardship, waiting in lines and navigating polling locations, but who still want to vote in person. 28 states and DC permit curbside voting on a regular basis, and even more have done so during the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, Harris County, Texas implemented a drive-through voting program, and 127,000 Texans use that program, about 10% of all in-person ballots cast in the county, and they've done so safely and efficiently. Now, curbside voting is not a replacement for absentee or traditional in-person polling place voting, but it is another option in the toolbox that allows voters who want to vote in person and use vote by mail just as a necessity to be able to show up and participate in the political process equally. I urge you to vote yes on HB 1020 and welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. We all, any questions for Mr. Johnson? All right, we have one person signed up favorable with amendment, Lou-Ann Blake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. My name is Lou-Ann Blake. I'm a member of the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland, and I am a resident of Baltimore City. The National Federation of the Blind of Maryland supports the concept of curbside voting because it will make the voting process more accessible to voters with disabilities. However, many voters with disabilities cannot hand mark a paper ballot, a blind voter, for instance. Blind voters cannot, as I mentioned, they actually can benefit from curbside voting if there is a choice in the way that they mark their ballot. So if they have a choice of either hand marking a paper ballot or if they are able to use the accessible ballot marking device that they would normally use in the polling place. The current ballot marking device that we use in Maryland has a battery in it. It's also portable, so it can be carried out to the curbside voting location so that a blind voter could mark their ballot privately and independently. So this is an amendment that should be made to this bill to allow for this choice of ballot marking. There also should be an amendment that would require the State Board of Elections to consider whether or not a ballot marking device is suitable for curbside voting when they're selecting a new voting system. Maryland has recommended these amendments to HB 1020, and we would support the bill with those amendments that include a choice in how the ballot will be marked, either hand marked ballot, paper ballot, or accessible ballot marking device. If we cannot support the bill, however, if these amendments are not included in the bill. So I would urge the committee to vote favorable with those amendments. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Ms. Blake? All right, thank you all very much. And we last have Catherine Berry speaking against the legislation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Special thank you to Delegate Williams for putting forth this bill, and we look forward to working with you in the near future. I have provided written testimony on behalf of the Maryland Association of Election Officials. My name is Catherine Berry. I'm the Election Director at the Carroll County Board of Elections and the co-chair of the Legislative Committee with Mayo. So as not to repeat everything that has been discussed and what is in my testimony, I would like to point out that we still do have some serious logistical concerns about having curbside voting at polling places and early voting centers. Many of the locations have difficulty with phone reception, and most polling places do not have access to landline phones. So there's just a logistical concern about how we would manage that, short of having a special bipartisan team that would manage the tasks outside. In addition, we have concern for the resources of computers and staff that will be required at local board offices that might not have the access to be able to do curbside voting because of, where their offices are located, where the early voting centers are. We do recognize that the amendment does give some flexibility, but then that also may alter the fiscal note of this bill significantly. In addition, we feel that consideration for where the electioneering zone is should be taken into consideration because the electioneering zone begins at 100 feet for all counties with the exception of Montgomery. So we want to continue to preserve how that voter intends to vote without having them interfere with the candidates and electioneers. It should be optional for each local board to implement curbside voting. As you see in my testimony, there were local boards that did provide a form of curbside voting, which is the absentee process that happened at the local boards in 2020. And voters are able to utilize, of course, the no excuse absentee voting. They can request a different polling place assignment for any reason, or bring someone with them to help them to vote. We also do not have enough ballot marking devices to be able to carry those out to the parking lots and keep them secure, free of being damaged and that type of thing if they're dropped. So we just want to make sure that voters do not have additional confusion with locations and times of doing curbside voting. I think this bill needs to be considered unfavorable at this time, but we would be willing to work with the delegate for future legislation. So thank you very much for your time, and I will be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Berry. And it does sound like Delegate Williams had already spoken with all of you.
Yes.
The efforts we've been trying to make in the legislature have all been about making things easier and more accessible. And when I was at the polls and somebody shows up with great difficulties, we were able to bring an election judge outside.
Yes.
How would you all feel if that something like this were done in a pilot to demonstrate that maybe it's not as onerous as you are imagining?
Sure, pilot, and I would defer to the State Board of Elections. Do we consider just looking at possibly putting something in regulation if it's necessary as a form, as opposed to in the law? That's my only other consideration.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Delegate Lutke?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Delegate Williams calling out one of the people that submitted written testimony. I just want to say for the members of the committee, if you don't know who Tony Coelho is, Congressman Coelho was the lead sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the guy is like, royalty in terms of, civil rights for people with disabilities. And I commend you to his testimony. Ms. Berry, you suggested allowing counties to opt in. I want to push back against that a little bit. I mean, don't you guys usually come in and say we should have consistent election practices across the state?
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Lukey. I guess to clarify my point, we as local boards, when we did the absentee curbside voting, it's done at the local level. There's nothing that's been codified in that way. And again, it was just for absentee voting at the local board offices. I agree. We always come in and we want to have uniformity. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. We'll obviously take a look at this, but to you, Ms. Berry, I think we have to figure out how we get to there, how we can make something like this work, whether we're able to solve it in the next 5 weeks or not. I think we should be able to solve it soon enough.
Sure, we're happy to work with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? All right, thank you, members. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1020. Next, have House Bill 1037, Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Mark Fisher, and before you is House Bill 1037, and it's titled Election Law Websites Reporting of Political Censorship. This bill requires specified online social networks or search engines that practice political censorship to file reports with the State Board of Elections, providing specified information regarding the political censorship and the monetary value of it to each candidate, political party, or question that benefits from it. The bill authorizes SBE to assess a civil penalty for failure to file a report. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to explain it. So if you go on your Facebook page now of your Facebook, for in my case, it's Friends of Mark Fisher. Everybody has one, I'm sure, in this committee and in the House of Delegates. It will be your campaign Facebook page, if you will. If you go into the Facebook page, you'll see two things. You'll see number of followers and number of friends. So imagine there are two candidates and they're running against each other, candidate 1 and candidate 2. Candidate 1 posts something on their Facebook page, but Facebook then applies an algorithm that permits only 20% of your Facebook friends of candidate 1 to see your posts. So let me say that again. So candidate number 1, let's say, has 1,000 friends, and they post something, and it's an election year, and Facebook then applies an algorithm to candidate 1 so that only 200 of your friends see your post. Conversely, candidate 2, who's running against candidate 1, does the same thing and also has 1,000 friends. But Facebook applies an algorithm that permits 100% of candidate 2's friends to see their posts. Well, that's a form of shadow banning, right? So that is a de facto contribution from Facebook to candidate 2, to candidate number 2, without question. So this bill would say that's a violation, and therefore there would be, of course, a civil penalty. Now, the bill also provides a kind of a beachhead for the SBE, the State Board of Elections, to be able to have an individual who is a contract position to focus on this issue, which is a very real issue. And I would much rather have SBE do it and look at it, which makes sense, than have some sort of, convoluted law that would pass that would try to identify these different things. I think we know that with algorithms, it's kind of easy to do this. And I think we sometimes suspect that it's being done. In this case, I guess what would happen is a candidate would tell the State Board of Elections, and their contract person and others at SBE would take a look at it. So what is the monetary value when you ask the question, when Facebook writes an algorithm to allow candidate number 2 and all of their friends and followers to see their posts versus candidate number 1? There's a real monetary value. That is the nexus in this bill. That is the nexus that says, well, that is a de facto donation and therefore it should be reported. And I think the cool thing about this bill is I think we all agree. And in no way am I suggesting, by the way, that that Facebook is choosing one party over the other, because I don't know. But I do think there are certain races they might choose one candidate over the other, depending on a lot of different things. And the best metaphor I can give you to explain, it's the equivalent of two people going to a gas station, and they both get regular gas, and they both get $50 worth of gas for their vehicles. And the person in vehicle number 1 really only got $20 worth of gas, but they're paying for $50. And person number 2 got all $50 worth of gas. This stuff happens frequently on Facebook and other social media platforms. And this bill would provide a beachhead for SBE to take a look at this and receive phone calls and complaints so that they can then look into it more. It's really an important issue, very straightforward. And with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Delegate Fisher. Are there any questions? All right, seeing no questions, I'll call up 2 people signed up to testify, one at a time. First, we have Vince McAvoy. McAvoy, are you here now? Yes, you are.
Thank you. I apologize for that. Let me kill the, I have had it on YouTube, so we had a delay there. Thank you. I want to commend Delegate Fisher for bringing this bill. I apologize for the switching between computers there. We had an issue that I was thinking in the ground world a few years back where we had political operatives removing signs up here in Baltimore County. They got caught. They were, and it was a friend of a governor who actually got arrested for this. But when you look at Delegate Fisher's bill, how do we know actually the percentage and to what level we're having this type of censorship? Other states, Texas, Florida, that is now jumping in, are working toward ending this censorship. They validate this. They understand that it exists. This is a start, as he says, the beachhead, and getting a grip on this, because if we're going to have elections, they should matter. They should reflect what our citizens are asking for. So thank you for your time, committee. I thank Delegate Fisher for bringing the bill. Urge a favorable.
Thank you, Mr. McAvoy. Any questions for Mr. McAvoy? All right, thank you very much. We do have one person signed up in opposition, Diana Bergman.
Good afternoon, delegates. My name is Diana Bergman. I'm a parent of 3 BCPS students and an active stakeholder. Also, I'm an OG team leader of Strong School, Maryland. I'm requesting an unfavorable report for House Bill 1037 because I don't support legislation that is unconstitutional, that could infringe upon my First Amendment rights of free speech, or to be denied the opportunity to petition to redress the grievances to a government body. Recently, at the end of last year, a couple of elected Board of Education members used their cover website on a social media platform for political censorship. They hid conversations, banned students, parents, and educators from commenting, and denied the opportunity of exercising their free speech to share concerns regarding education topics. Some conversations were deleted permanently. Unless you're a presidential candidate, I doubt a political candidate here in Maryland could have 50 million visitors per year. And what kind of candidate has enough money to pay for violations? This concept of filing a report to get permission to censorship sounds bizarre to me. I became a US citizen in 2008, and I paid quite a bit of money to become a citizen. I don't want our public body agencies to have the liberty of suppressing the voice of the people. North Korea controls everything the public listens to, and so does my native country of Cuba. Do we really want to go down this rabbit hole, Maryland? The most simple recommendation I can offer is, if a political candidate does not want to hear what the public has to say, don't have a cover website on social media platform. Better yet, give House Bill 1037 an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Bergman? All right, thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. McAvoy, Ms. Bergman, for testifying. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 1037. We move next, Delegate Ernst, to House Bill 1140.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ben Rubo, and I'm an intern for Delegate Arians, who cannot be here today to present House Bill 1140 before the committee. House Bill 1140 would establish a process by which an individual may opt out of a disclosure of personal information in the individual's voter registration record to any person other than an employee or vendor of the state board. This will prohibit disclosure of personal information in an individual's voter registration record if the person decides they want their information private. I will now hand it off to Charlene Connors.
All right.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Charlene Connors. I'm a resident of Maryland, and I have been a voting resident for several decades. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of House Bill 1140, which will provide the Maryland voters with this opt-out measure to secure their personal information. I want to thank Delegate Ahrens for introducing the bill and taking this interest. I already submitted my written testimony to the committee. By allowing the Maryland voters with the opt-out, they'll be able to protect their identity from identity theft, election fraud, and also viewpoint discrimination, because I would really like to have their political party affiliation not put out into general public. Because the voter registration list contains the name, the address, the date of birth, the voter's ID number, collectively this information identifies a specific voter out of all the voters in the United States. Therefore, it should be considered as a personal identifier, and then it should be protected as a social security number would be considered sensitive records and be protected. It is important to consider the impact that I had shown in my testimony, that the voters' information has already been transferred out of the state of Maryland. Millions of information. The data brokers, they obtain these personal information records, and then they resell these for a profit. So it has nothing to do with election. It's only for economics. And also this information can easily be transferred out of the United States within minutes. And once it's sold, people in foreign countries or in different states, they can use this information to set up accounts, to commit fraudulent activities against Maryland voters. Election fraud is just one problem with the information that's publicly disclosed. But my concern is mostly with the identity theft, because that's the fastest growing crime in the U.S. Currently. Approximately 10% of Americans have already been victimized by identity theft, and which is twice as much as the global percentage. So Americans are specifically being targeted in scams. For an example, fraud loss in 2019 was over $16 billion to the American people. Clearly, with the information that's available on the registration list, people can set up new accounts. They can open up charge accounts. Citizens that are elderly or already in debt are very much more likely to be victimized by scams. The state of Maryland and the Board of Elections have already deemed this personal information as sensitive information, as some people are allowed to protect their disclosure of their information by the confidentiality request, and other members or voters are not given that same ability. So this practice is expressly discriminatory, and it should be changed. All Maryland voters should be given the same opportunity to protect their personal information, not just specific groups. And just because somebody has signed up on the register to vote, that doesn't give consent for selling that information. So for me personally, I don't do social media. This is actually my first time even doing a Zoom meeting. I don't have Facebook. I do everything I can to protect my personal information. We have been victims of identity theft, and it is long and arduous to get it straightened out after you've been hit by this. So I don't think that it's appropriate for my personal information to be sold by the Board of Elections without my consent. So once again, thank you for this opportunity to express my concerns, and I'll take any questions if you have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Connors. Any questions for Ms. Connors? All right, thank you. Seeing no questions, thank you, Ms. Connors. Thank you for signing up today, and I hope using Zoom did not prove to be too challenging.
It was fine, thank you.
As it continues to be for one of our members every day. No names. Delegate Parrott, House Bill 1192.
I resent that remark, Madam Chair.
No names, but thank you. Delegate
Madam Chair and Ways and Means Committee, it's my pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. This is House Bill 1192. It's election law, signature verification of absentee ballots.
So what's the problem? Why do we need this bill? Well, it would help to give more voter confidence in Maryland's elections. Right now, 32 states and the District of Columbia have some form of signature validation, and Maryland joins 18 others that have none at all. And this bill would take care of that and bring us into the vast majority of the states and the District of Columbia to have a process to validate signatures. Of course, this would help increase the voter confidence of the elections. Some people have said, well, there's no problem at all. I would just refer you to Judicial Watch. They're a nonprofit. They submitted testimony, not for or against the bill, but just stating some of the problems. If you look on page 4 and 5, they state several different examples where voter fraud is occurring, and especially they point out
We lost you.
We'll give him another hand. All right, we may have to.
Madam Chair, I can hear him. I think he said move unfavorable. No, I'm joking.
All right, we're going to give Delegate Parrott another minute, and if that does not work out, we'll try to get him to come at the end of the hearing. But let's give him another chance right now while his people testifying are ready to go as well. Delegate Parrott, are you there? All right, now unmute and start again. Or don't start again, but start where you picked.
Okay.
Lost.
Well, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. It got kicked off. It's great to be back with you. We're just talking signature verification. 32 states, District of Columbia has it. Maryland needs to have it. 15 years they've been working on having computers be able to validate signatures, and it's really been used by the banking industry. And the last election, a lot of states did use electronic verification, including states like Florida and California. Both used those in the last election. So what does this bill do? Basically, it says when you go to get an absentee ballot or a mail-in vote by mail ballot, if you're requesting it by hand, that we would validate that signature. You can still request it using the online methodology where you just provide your driver's license. No problem there. We're not validating signatures. It's easy to do. With the bill, it does ask the person, what is the best method to reach you in case we need to reach you, whether that's mail or texting or a phone? Because in the case that the signatures don't validate, we don't want to throw out those ballots. We just want to make sure that it's the right person. So we're going to be able to contact that person the way they'd like to be contacted to see if we can get them that ballot they requested, or once they actually go to vote, you know, you have to sign the outside of that envelope when you vote by mail. And when you sign it, that's what's going to be validated, that versus your signature when you registered to vote. And they're going to find out if something's wrong, what is wrong, and they can get the right evidence to make sure that it's the right person that's actually voting. So basically, the bill will validate the signatures. It will ask the Board of Elections to do that, to provide the machines that are needed, and then the local Board of Elections by county will actually be in charge of validating the signatures. And I think this will go a long way to giving people confidence in Maryland's elections, because we all know voting by mail is going to increase in use as we move forward. Maybe not as much as the last time, especially in the primaries where everyone was mailed a ballot. But people are going to request these ballots. It's a very, very convenient way to vote. And I just want to make sure that when they vote, I think this bill makes sure that when they do vote, using this methodology, that we know that it's the right person who voted. So with that, I'd like to encourage you to vote for House Bill 1192.
Delegate Parrott, I want to give you a chance to respond to the arguments from the NFIB. They'll be speaking today. Are you familiar with their opposition?
Well, one of their opposition points was that this is not a problem. And that's where I just referred to the Judicial Watch, page 4 and 5.
Well, I don't think that's their unique argument.
That's one of their arguments. Their unique argument is that
it would make it more difficult for people who are blind or have other things that make it harder to vote, that they might have to disclose what their issues are. But I think it's difficult now, but people are able to get this ballots. They are able to vote. It really doesn't change the process at all. You can do it all electronically as before. But when you do actually vote, you submit that in, and that would just require whoever that person is just to submit it in, and it could be validated very easily through this bill. I don't see a problem.
I just want to see if you understood why the disability community feels singled out on something like this. But I understand you don't see it as a problem. I'll go to the next person testifying. We have Greg Decker.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Greg Decker from Gaithersburg. Appreciate the opportunity to comment on this bill. I believe this body is currently looking favorably on an instituting process of mailing out ballots to all those on the voter rolls. Many of us believe this presents an opportunity for fraud, obviously. Definitely appearance of such an opportunity. For this reason, I believe it's a very bad idea, and I've testified to that effect in previous sessions before this committee. So here I see as an opportunity to demonstrate a sensitivity to these concerns and demonstrate that although you may be set on providing a more convenient way for folks to cast ballots, you realize the importance of maintaining the integrity of the vote. During this last general election cycle, there were 9 states that mailed out ballots to everyone on the voter rolls. 5 of those states had this practice in place before the pandemic. All 5 of those states had provisions in place to verify signatures on return ballots. Of the other 4, 3 of them had these provisions in place as well. Example, states that required the signature verification include Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado. So I think if you're going to institute an election process involving mailing out ballots to everyone on the voter rolls, which will necessarily include mailing out blank ballots to many addresses where no valid voter resides, to avoid questions about the integrity of these returned ballots, I think there must be a process in place to verify the validity of these returned ballots. So I respectfully request a favorable report on this House Bill 1192. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Ms. Waterman?
Thank you, Chairman Kaiser, members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today before you all. As you all have heard several times before already, I'm president of the Maryland Federation of Republican Women and testifying on their behalf of our over 1,300 members. Basically, it's kind of a me too to what Mr. Decker and what Delegate Parrott had said, that we believe this is a way to provide minimum proof of identity. I mean, let me say this is a way to address some of the concerns that some people, including the members of my federation, have about protecting our vote and making sure that our vote is actually cast by us, and helping reduce any possibility of fraud, even when you don't believe it doesn't exist. If it exists in one place, that this will help to take care of that. Delegate Parrott quoted the number of states that have already done this. I'm not entirely sure what the disabled group is concerned with in exact verbiage, but I'm sure if 32 other jurisdictions have done it, they have found a way to overcome any problems or obstacles that would be put in place of anybody with any disability. So for all of those reasons, and to get out of your way so you can get on with your day, the Maryland Federation asks for a favorable report on this bill and thanks you for the opportunity to testify.
All right, thank you all so much. Do we have any questions for Mr. Decker or Ms. Waterman? All right, thank you. We next have Luann Blake, unfavorable.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on this bill. I am a member of the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland, and we are requesting an unfavorable report on this bill. If enacted, this bill will create additional barriers to voters with disabilities. It will require the voter to identify the reason why the provided signature did not match the signature that's on record, which will force a voter to disclose their disability. Offering the opportunity to provide additional identification documents or to vote in person only creates additional barriers. If a voter is requesting an absentee ballot, then he or she most likely does not have the time or the ability to travel to the election board with the appropriate documents or to vote in person. HB 1192 offers a solution to a problem that does not exist. If there is a problem with voter fraud, then where is the data to support that claim? The end result of this bill will be that voters will be discouraged from voting absentee because of all the barriers that it creates. Members of the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland urge committee members to please vote unfavorable on HB 1192. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members? Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, is there a machine or something that can do this rapidly? If once they sign the ballots, they can be verified? Is there software with a machine? I'm just curious.
We could ask with the board, Mr. Demarinis, when it's done in other states, is it usually done by a person or by a machine? Do you know?
I do not know, Chair. So, but yeah, we can find out or get any information that the committee requests for that.
Okay, and Stan, do you know that either?
Sorry, what was the question, Madam Chair?
Just
is there a machine?
How could a machine do the signature verification for most people?
Yeah, I believe so. That a lot of states use a combination of both machine verification and manual verification. Typically, in states that use machines, they most of them will be validated by machine, but if there's a question of non-matching, then that would be referred for human review.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Delegate Long, for that question. All right, seeing no other questions on House Bill 1192, we will go to Delegate Mounts, House Bill 1205.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm presenting HB, it's Johnny Mounts testifying for Calva, Caroline, Dorchester, Wacomico counties. I'm presenting HB 1205. This legislation is pretty short and simple. It's requesting the State Board of Elections compile a detailed report on the use of absentee ballots in the 2020 election. There's no rhyme or reason as to how this request for putting together a report was compiled. It's mostly a collection of questions that I've gathered along the way, talking to people, having different discussions about the election and getting input from various constituents. I checked the State Board of Elections website to try to generate some of this information, and there's a lot of information there, but specifically focused on absentee ballots, which have attracted a whole lot of attention. This type of detail wasn't available, and having an official report kind of documenting things would help answer a lot of questions, and I think it would give the general public, myself and others, a better understanding of how absentee ballots were used in the 2020 election, and as questions come up about future elections, it provide a good foundation for kind of understanding absentee ballots. It's short, it's 2 pages. I've got a 1-page rule, so I violated my own rule. I went to 2 pages, but it's straightforward. It's right there, and also the fiscal note shows that there's no additional cost. And I'm open to amendments or things to make it easier, to more workable. Some of the language may be a little difficult. That's fine. Anything I can do to try to put this together, I think would be a step in the right direction. Thank you for the time to present HB 1205. And I always forget to do this, but I need to ask you for your favorable support or a favorable recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Has that been the problem for you?
Yeah, I always, for the most important part, the hook. I don't ever set the hook. So hopefully you guys, hopefully we got the hook and we can get this thing worked out and get it moving.
All right, thank you, Delegate Meltz. Any questions for the delegate? All right, seeing none, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 12.
Oh, Madam Chair.
Delegate Wilkins, he almost got out unscathed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Delegate, and thank you so much for bringing this bill. I do agree with you in terms of making sure we have a record of every election and some reporting. I wanted to make sure and ask if you were aware that SBE did write a very detailed report after the primary and after the general elections in 2020 that did include information about absentee ballots. I know you said you looked on the website. Were you aware of that report?
No, I did not see that one. I did not.
Okay. Wonderful. So we'll be sure to share that with you, and I appreciate this bill, and perhaps you know, this reporting information is something we can work on together. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Chair, I forgot to mention, I did have two witnesses to testify. Hans von Spagatsky, I messed it up, but he's an expert on absentee ballots with the Heritage Foundation. And Professor Joseph Prudhomme was supposed to testify. They took the time to log on, but they weren't able to make the cut on the witness list. I just wanted to share that with you.
Make the cut? Everyone makes the cut. You mean they didn't make the time?
I don't understand. Yeah, I don't. They were in.
Yeah, we don't have any limits unless you're hitting 50 people, so that didn't pick up. Delegate Wilkins, did you have a follow-up question?
No, Madam Chair, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Meltz. Delegate Polakovich-Carr with the next bill, House Bill 1038.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 1038. This bill aims to increase transparency and accountability at our State Board of Elections. And in fact, this is one of 4 priority pieces of legislation for the Maryland Association of Counties, MACO. There are 3 major provisions to the bill. The first one has to do with the composition of our State Board of Elections. And I realize the terminology is a little confusing, but in this case, I'm referring to specifically the 5 people who are currently appointed by the governor to serve on the board. State law doesn't have much requirements in terms of who is eligible to be appointed to that body. You just have to have been a voter in Maryland for the prior 5 years. That's the main qualification. But given the importance of that body in overseeing and in running our elections, this legislation would outline some additional expertise that we'd be looking for people who serve on that body, including expertise in cybersecurity, procurement, inclusion and diversity, and also ADA issues. And I'll note that this isn't a judgment on the current people who are currently serving on this board, but rather looking ahead prospectively at future vacancies on the board and ensuring that we have people who bring some expertise to that body. The legislation also adds 2 additional seats to the State Board of Elections that would be selected by the Speaker of the House and by the Senate President. Those 2 positions would have to be one from a person from a more populous county, one from a person from a less populous county, again, to bring some additional diversity to that body. I will note that the addition of those 2 seats would not change the partisan composition of the body under state law. And finally, the bill would add a non-voting position to allow the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials to serve and again, to provide their expertise on the state board. The second major provision of the legislation has to do with financial transparency. Having transparency in government is definitely a model we should all be striving for, and helps give taxpayers confidence in terms of how their money is being spent. There have been some issues in the past involving the state board where large and high dollar contracts have not necessarily been brought before the state board for their input or approval. For instance, this past election cycle, the vendor who was printing the mail-in ballots withdrew from that contract. Staff arranged for a new vendor and signed that contract, but there didn't appear to be any input by the state board while that process was going on. So this legislation would say that for any contracts that are worth $50,000 or more, those high dollar contracts, that the state board would have to actually formally approve those contracts so that they have some input into the process and are, again, providing their expertise. This would also provide some much needed public transparency around those high dollar contracts. And the third major provision of the legislation would clarify the cost sharing between the State Board of Elections and our local boards of elections. That cost sharing is currently driven right now by some uncodified language that was included in legislation that passed 20 years ago. But that legislation is rather vague. DLS actually recently noted in an analysis of the 2022 budget that, quote, the statute determining categories of spending to be split leaves room for interpretation on which election administration costs are to be shared by the state and local governments, end quote. And DLS goes on to say that, quote, decisions about the allocations of costs have appeared to have changed throughout the fiscal year, end quote. And that was referring to this past election cycle. So this legislation will put some guardrails in place and provide more predictability for our local partners in terms of exactly which election costs they are responsible for versus which are the obligations of the state. And finally, I will note that the bill also codifies some current practices in regards to ballot drop boxes and the updating of voter registration lists. And the committee should have an amendment that we submitted. It's also uploaded in the floor system. There is a rather substantive sponsor amendment. And so some of the things I've discussed today are actually included in that sponsor amendment. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Polakovich-Carr? All right, good job. Well, two people are signed up to testify, but I'll first go back to a question from the Vice Chair. Did you have a question? I saw your hand up for a second.
I did put my hand up, but I was just going to ask a quick question. Is this bill cross-filed? I haven't had an opportunity to look it up, but it sounds like your senator's cross-file almost a little bit.
Yes, Senator Kagan is the cross-file.
That's what I thought. Okay, she was telling me about this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to call up the two people in favor, starting with Kevin Canelli.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canelli here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in strong support of House Bill 1038. As Delegate Polakovich-Carr mentioned, this is a priority bill for MACO this session. This bill is long overdue. The state's odd and antiquated mix of laws and practices in governing elections certainly deserves a much needed reboot. And this bill will clarify those election laws with an emphasis on fairness, transparency, and accountability. There are two major issues here for county governments: transparency and accountability for the State Board of Elections, which often makes unilateral decisions without local input, is number one. Counties who actually run elections need to be at the table for those large contract and procurement decisions. And this bill would allow us to do that as part of a true partnership with the state. It accomplishes that by requiring that SBE takes necessary and appropriate steps to provide transparency and accountability for these transactions, which will certainly afford ample opportunity for input from local governments and Maryland voters. So what does that mean and what does that accomplish? Too often, counties find out that the state election staff at the state board or the board have just made some big commitment, like selecting a vendor for a new technology, and the only input from the counties is that we're going to pay the bill. We've seen multiple election projects that are worth millions of dollars come before the Board of Public Works, and the funding comes from a vague term called special funds with no explanation of what that really means. What special funds means is code for we're going to bill the counties. So fortunately, you all have typically asked in the BPW, where are these funds coming from what counties, which counties, what's the formula, do they support this? Were they part of the process that got us here? This bill just takes all those questions that you've been asking on the back end and puts those on the front end. So the next time we see a multi-million-dollar project, everybody knows what's going on. If the counties are paying for it, then we all know it and we've prepared our budgets. It's just the right way to do this. The second piece is fairness. As Delegate Polakovich-Carr mentioned, we rely on uncodified language from 2001 when it comes to the state and county funding split for election systems and voting machines. That language is vague, and we often see decisions that shift costs onto local boards whose operations are supported by counties. And I want to talk about one specific example. I know my time is short. Delegate Polakovich-Carr mentioned the DLS budget analysis for SBE. They talk about the poll book project. There can be disagreement about whether or not that's part of the election system. We think it is, SBE thinks it's not, but there's a bigger issue here that I think is really important to understand. What the budget analysis shows is that over the course of 1 year, the state has gone from funding 31% of this poll book project, which is about 9.3 million, to just 11%, which is 3.3 million. So in 1 year, the state decided to shift $6 million onto counties. And as DLS notes, they provided no explanation for the shift. And the result is that counties are now being made to fund 89% of this project. We have zero input, oversight, or participation. I know it's a big project, but the bottom line is so long as the state does
Mr.
not.
Canelli,
Yes.
I should give you 2.5 extra minutes from every other time you testify, but I can't really do that. So you hit the 3-minute mark.
No worries. As long as the state doesn't have to bear the burden of these costs, it doesn't have to make decisions that are fiscally prudent. So we'd ask to codify this language. We'd ask for clarity. We'd ask for a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. We next have Lou-Ann Blake.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I pull up my notes here. The National Federation of the Blind supports expanding the members of the State Board of Elections to include a member who has expertise in the rights of voters with disabilities. Because Maryland law actually recognizes the right of providing voters with disabilities the same experience or an experience that is equivalent to voters without disabilities when it comes to voting. And because of this recognition, the state board should have a member who is knowledgeable about the rights of voters with disabilities. Unfortunately, since 2016, the policies of the state board have ignored the law and promoted segregated voting for voters with disabilities. The state board has also ignored the 2013 opinion of the Maryland Attorney General that requires a significant number of voters without disabilities use the ballot marking device so that voters with disabilities would have a secret ballot. Having a member of the state board who is knowledgeable about issues for voters with disabilities could also prevent litigation, which would save the state money. Over the last 7 years, the National Federation of the Blind has filed lawsuit twice against the State Board of Election for failure to provide equal access to voting by voters with disabilities. So because of all these reasons, the bill, I believe it has been amended to make the requirement that the one additional member have expertise in the rights of voters with disabilities to now just recommend to be a recommendation. The National Federation of the Blind supports that this should be a requirement and not just a recommendation. And so we would urge you to support that and then provide a favorable recommendation on SB 1038. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions for either Mr. Canelli or Ms. Blake? Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Canelli. You were beginning to give an example of kind of like a discrepancy between, the state and the local boards as it pertained to cost sharing. I didn't know if you had any other kind of examples of, kind of just lack of understanding or some type of discrepancy between kind of the cost sharing provisions with the state board and the locals.
Sure. Thank you, Delegate Smith. This was an issue during the last election, the state and local funding structure, because while state statute mandates that counties pay for 1/2 of the postage cost for mail-in ballots, the administration's directive for the board to send all registered voters mail-in ballot applications rather than ballots resulted in unforeseen and substantial costs for the local boards. MACO raised this issue. The state board actually voted for the state to pay half of the cost for both mailers, but the administration did not take action. And it's because we don't have that necessary clarity for state and local funding, issues like this pop up and counties got stuck with the bill. Even though I think we would all agree the intent there was that that should have been a 50-50 split, even the board agreed. So by codifying and clarifying this language, we think that it will provide security for state and county governments and budgets, and it makes sure that everybody is on the same page. So there are multiple times this has come up, but I think that would be the most recent one.
All right, any other questions? Delegate Washington.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Canelli, I think this is thank you for your testimony first. And I think I agree with the chairwoman that you do deserve about 2.5 extra minutes for your time speaking. So great work on that. But I just want to ask you a question about the cost sharing again. I mean, because this is a big difference. And where are they? You said that the state board recommended that the state pay for 50% of those, but the administrator did not pay for 50% of those costs?
So thank you. The state board actually voted yes to say the state should pay 50%, but the administration did not release the funds. So it had to go through the Department of Budget and Management. They did not take the request. They did not release the funds. And so therefore the state did not end up paying 50% of those costs. And we just think that if we had that in statute, that clarity, we wouldn't have these kind of questions. There wouldn't be so much heartburn over these issues when they pop up.
And the procurement for the ballots starts at the state board, right? I mean, the procurement for the ballot starts at state board. So they're procuring this work, but the state, the local counties have to pay for most of it, or if not half, or at this point paid for a lot of it.
Yes, and look, I think it makes sense to have, you know, a centralized state board of elections to make sure that we're all on the same page statewide. We have that uniformity, but again, at the end of the day, if the counties are going to foot the bill for something and we have no inputs over these decisions, it's hard to justify, especially when we see costs rising and rising without much of an explanation. So really, that's what this is about. And so I think that we just need that clarity, and we need to, this language is uncodified from 2001. It's just long overdue to get everybody on the same page and provide everybody with that clarity.
Got it. I would just say that it seems like even if we do codify some things, it seems like the administration still doesn't move on our codified language. So just throwing that out there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No problem, Mr. Vice Chair. Any other questions for the witnesses on this bill? All right, the next bill is House Bill 1345. I'll turn things over to the Vice Chair for these last 4 bills, even though I will listen to the 3 after mine. Mine is House Bill 1345.
Madam Chair, House Bill 1345.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right. Thank you to members. Really just want to tell a quick story here. There we were 2 or 3 weeks before the election, sitting on our couch, Nancy and I saying, all right, it's time to vote. Let's figure this out. And we start going through the papers and we open our our mail-in ballot application. And we're like, all right, here's the instructions. Here's the thing here's the pieces we need for in Spanish. Here's the pieces we need if we're helping a voter. And then we realized not everything had a paired document for something being in Spanish. So that seemed a little unusual. And then we got to the meat of it, the actual instructions. And you know, between us, we're educated. We have 2 master's degrees. We have a law degree. And we just looked at each other and said, who writes these instructions? And felt like there are people less educated who are probably having greater challenges. Maybe not. I am form deficient. You can all ask my current and former staff that. I'm really bad at forms. But in reading the instructions, we're like, could it be any more vague? Wait, there's 2 sheets. Can we fold them put them together and then fold? Do we have to fold them independently? Like, what's going on here? So I'm serious to say that I thought things need to be better explained. This is honestly true throughout our government when it comes to our program verifications, benefits we do in the social services, tax credits we provide. We write everything at too high of a level. And then not everyone is like me. When I have a question about something on my ballot, I text the deputy board administrator in my county and she answers my questions. Not everyone has that access as we all do to answer those questions. So, you know, I'm worried about the forms, and the forms basically come from the state and not from our local jurisdictions. So it's not that we need to fix all 24 jurisdictions. In a lot of cases, it's making things consistent across the state. In terms of the website, I know that a lot of people were helping their friends, their constituents, and others understanding the website. And people talked about the website process being difficult to request an absentee ballot, the process being confusing on whether to get an online or a paper ballot sent them, a ballot sent to them by email or by paper. Many of us were discouraging our constituents from choosing the online version. But people weren't aware of the pluses and minuses of using either format. And so they needed to be educated. I was impressed. The local boards, a lot of people were upset that that the boards could not tell them when their ballot was accepted. And what I learned in the process was ballot accepted is a term of art that is used during the certification process. And yet, because we had this unusual pandemic election, and I will credit the governor for, I think, making almost all good decisions on how we could speed things up and move things along. But our local boards were impressive because they allowed the changing of the word A for accepted to now mean your ballot was in, and not their usual meaning for that letter, knowing how concerned people were. And I certainly, and I'm sure many of you did as well, called the Board of Elections, my constituent so-and-so is worried their ballot isn't in, what can you do to help? And so I did that quite a few times, and they were willing to tell me exactly what was going on, and I could get back to someone and say, your ballot's in, there's no concern, or hey, your ballot got lost under a pile of things. Truly happened to our Board of Education's adult son, a member's son, who handed it in at the board's office even. So I just think the online system needs to be cleaned up. I think the paper system needs to be cleaned up. There's something called the Center for Civic Design, probably something we, like I said, we could use in other parts of government as well. So this is probably my longest testimony of my 10 or so bills this session, but without reading it or really looking at the notes and just telling the story, people have trouble with this. And why don't we just make it easier? So I urge a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Any questions? Madam Chair, I do have a question for you. Would you agree that ballot questions are also difficult to understand as well? That they are.
I do. I was leaving that out, knowing that that is a process that's typically done by the Secretary of State's office and is separate really from our Board of Elections. So that's why I was excluding. But yes, I think those require master's or doctorate degrees to understand.
Correct. And we did change that a couple of years ago to make it more easily to legible. The other question I have for you, you mentioned someone by the name of Nancy. You were sitting on a couch next to that person, for the record. Who was that person?
Oh, that would be my spouse, the love of my life. Thank you for asking.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. I wasn't sure who that person was, so that's all. Any other questions for the chair?
Any more personal questions?
Okay, we'll go to our speakers or witnesses on the bill. Ms. Joanne Antoine.
Yes, good afternoon, Vice Chair Washington and members of the committee. For the record, Joanne Antoine, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1345, which would improve the usability, design, and accessibility of our mail-in voting materials. I think one of our biggest takeaways from the 2020 election was that, we needed to improve all of these materials that voters were receiving. I think in our interactions with voters, we found, similar to Delegate Kaiser, that instructions were confusing, that translated materials didn't match the images that were on those materials. A few voters didn't realize their ballot came, especially during the primary, where we didn't even have the purple stripe on the envelopes yet. And then obviously there were concerns around privacy. So HB 1345 would allow us to adopt some of this best practices that would ensure that voters know how to clearly understand how to vote their ballot and return their ballot. If you look at the testimony that was submitted by Whitney from the Center for Civic Design, you'll see that she provides a few images, templates for envelopes. These obviously would be altered for our specific needs in Maryland, but the visuals help you see the direction that we're hoping that we can head in. This would allow us to also address some of the other issues that have come up in previous hearings around things like party affiliation and signatures and other issues of that sort. So again, this process just aims to improve our mail-in process as we expect more voters to begin to use this process, and we'd urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet Millinson.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Janet Millinson. I represent the League of Women Voters of Maryland. As you know, the League supports voting by mail, and we've researched the best practices for implementing it. Because of the pandemic and the recent election, 50% of all ballots were voted by mail, as opposed to the usual proportion of about 3 to 6%. Although we certainly hope conditions will be more normal in 2022, it's reasonable to expect that the number of Marylanders choosing to vote by mail will be higher than was historically the case. The time to prepare for that increase is now. In 2020, a range of emergency procedures enabled our state and local boards of elections to manage the unusual burden. However, those procedures were temporary and often incomplete. House Bill 1345 proposes a number of permanent improvements that will increase accessibility, fairness, and voter engagement. For instance, everyone will benefit from plain language instructions that are easy to understand. As you've heard, many voters in 2020 were confused by the unfamiliar and inconsistent requirements, and hotlines were flooded with questions. Let's make sure no one is discouraged from casting a ballot because the directions are unclear. The bill also calls for developing a consistent, efficient design of absentee voting materials. This will make it easier for voters to recognize official mailings and less likely to accidentally misplace or discard them. Incorporating the certification of assistance and multilingual instructions where required into the design of the return envelope will mean fewer pieces of paper to keep track of and significant savings on printing and postage. Lastly, the bill would formulate regulations to make it easier to cure absentee ballots that arrive with correctable errors such as an unsigned oath. The local boards would have several options for communicating with voters about fixing the problem in a timely way, and this will reduce the number of ballots that get rejected during the canvass. In conclusion, these provisions would simplify absentee voting and would also save money through streamlining the design of election materials. The League of Women Voters urges a favorable report on House Bill 1345. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Summers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Washington, the rest of the committee. My name is Dr. Catherine Summers. I'm testifying in support of HB 1345. I teach human-computer interaction at the University of Baltimore and I specialize in inclusive design for people who don't read well or who are older or who use assistive technology. And my team at the University of Baltimore has worked with the Maryland State Board of Elections on voting projects in the past, including testing ballot marking devices, working with them on the online voter registration and ballot marking tools to make them more usable, and simplifying training materials for poll workers. This bill is a chance to solidify what I think is Maryland's historical commitment to usable and inclusive voting, and paves the way for needed improvement. And among its strengths, as you've just heard, it codifies the use of plain language in the design of all voting materials. And I'd like to explain why this is so important. Maryland has over 2 million adults who read at level 2 or below, as measured by the US Department of Education in 2017. These voters are effectively disenfranchised when election materials are not written in plain language. And the good news is plain language is not hard to achieve. It means using simple, familiar words, simple sentences. Most of all, it means testing voting materials with real voters to make sure that the voting process is clear and understandable. The good news, as again, Janet Millinson said, research shows that plain language allows both high and low literacy voters to find information more quickly, answer more questions correctly, perform more tasks successfully. It really benefits everyone. I'm actually very proud of Maryland's commitment to making elections both secure and inclusive. I think it makes us exemplary. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I refer you to the written testimony in support of this bill, and I ask you to build on Maryland's past success by voting yes on HB 1345. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Summers, and thank you to all the witnesses for speaking today. Any questions for the three speakers? Seeing none, that concludes the public hearing for House Bill 1345. Next, we'll have House Bill 1350, Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and hello to everyone on the committee. For the record, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins presenting House Bill 1350. This is a bill that passed the committee and the House unanimously last year. And what it does is that it makes several changes to our campaign finance procedures. That includes allowing disbursements by a campaign finance entity to be approved by the treasurer rather than every disbursement having to be made by the treasurer. As you know, currently only the treasurer can make disbursements in campaign finance accounts. The bill also requires that a campaign finance entity that becomes liable for a civil penalty, so that means our most egregious actors who have challenges with making sure that their campaign finance is accurate and correct and submitted in the right ways, that they would be required to submit bank statements. So what that does is it would help SBE to be able to ascertain and see more details around the campaign finance entity. SBE would be able to waive this requirement after one submission of a bank statement at its discretion. However, unless the SBE waives it, the entity would continue submitting bank statements either until the end of the election cycle or 2 years after their last finance report was due. I think these changes are critical to ensure that any campaigns that are, egregious actors when it comes to violating our campaign finance laws, that we have some accountability and additional detail there. And I urge a favorable report on House Bill 1350.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. And you mentioned that this bill passed last year. Any reason why it didn't get through the Senate?
I don't have any details on that other than the fact that this was one of the casualties of us adjourning abruptly and early.
Correct. Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Wilkins? Seeing none, we'll go to our first witness, Ms. Joanne Antoine.
Yes, for the record, Joanne Antoine of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1350. This bill passed last session, was voted out of committee last session, so I'll keep my testimony short. It really just aims to increase transparency, especially in cases where campaign finance entities are in violation of campaign finance laws. So building on the already required reporting and disclosure would, expand the reporting, expanding the reporting requirements to campaign finance entities that have accrued a civil penalty to include bank statements would help with addressing the issue where sometimes we have skewed campaign finance reports, which give the perception of real advantages for candidates. And I think also, bank statements would help reduce this by creating more accurate campaign reporting in cases where campaign finance entities become liable. So I say all that to say we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antoine. Any questions for Ms. Antoine? Seeing none, that concludes the public hearing for House Bill 1350. Delegate Wilkins, we're going to take up House Bill 1351.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chair. Hello again, everyone. Delegate Janelle Wilkins. I'm pleased to present House Bill 1351, which deals with contributions through third-party payment processors. This bill was unanimous in our committee last year. This bill requires a campaign finance entity to initiate a transfer of a contribution made through a third-party processor. So that's, your PayPal, your Cash App, your Venmo, to deposit those funds into the campaign account, campaign finance account within 7 days after the contribution is deposited into the account of that third-party processor. So in other words, to make it simple, if a campaign finance entity is using a PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, you name it, that doesn't automatically sweep those funds into the campaign account. They have 7 days to make sure they transfer those funds into the campaign account. So this is a bill that I think, once again, just ensures that we have a standard process and that all of the funds are being accounted for in the campaign account. And I urge a favorable report on HB 1351.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. Any questions for the sponsor of the bill? Seeing none, we'll go to our first witness, Ms. Joanne Antoine.
For Joanne Antoine of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1351, which will ensure contributions being made to a candidate that they're accurately disclosed and accounted for, even if the contribution is made using a merchant or third-party account. Our current law already requires that candidates transfer money from their merchant account because all these deposits are supposed to be received by a candidate's campaign account and reported. So this legislation just goes a bit further by requiring that candidates requiring candidates to timely or in a more timely fashion transfer their contributions that were made to their merchants accounts into the campaign account. So it's a simple but significant change that will increase accountability and transparency in our campaign finance system, and we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Antoine? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing for House Bill 1351. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we're going to go to House Bill 1352, which will be our last bill of the day. Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And also thank you to all my colleagues and good afternoon. For the record, my name is Delegate Stephanie Smith, and I'm here to present House Bill 1352. This is a bill that was offered in the last session. It not only passed through our committee, it passed out of the House, but unfortunately, we did run out of time, last session due to the pandemic. So what this bill is focused on is campaign finance reports and making sure that we have an understanding of the business contributors' registration status. So what this bill would require SDAT, which is the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, on every January 15th would be required to transmit data to the State Board of Elections concerning the status of businesses that are registered with SDAT and also those businesses that have forfeited their registration or otherwise lost their registration in that particular year. The reason why this is important is that we know that there are a lot of concerns about businesses either intentionally or unintentionally running afoul of our state's campaign finance laws. By having this regular transmission of data from SDAT to SBE would also give SBE the information they need to initiate audits and investigations as necessary when they see inconsistencies in terms of the donations coming from business entities. This is a good governance campaign finance transparency bill. It has obviously been supported by the House in the past, and I am very hopeful and optimistic that it will gain a favorable report from you all today. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present House Bill 1352, and I do hope you give it a favorable report. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the sponsor of the bill? Seeing none, we'll go to our favorite witness, Ms. Joanne Antoine.
Yes, Joanne, for the record, Joanne Antoine with Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 1352, which would help to easily identify suspicious donations from businesses in our elections. I think we've testified on this bill or different versions of this bill for numerous years now. We've shared concerns about research that we've done where we've had interns a lot of times helping to follow the money where sometimes we're looking at LLCs that kind of go back to a vacant lot where we're finding that there are owners of businesses who have created multiple businesses and are in violation of the law. So this bill, allows for the cross-referencing of the two databases, which makes research easier on our end, but also more importantly for the public, allows them to kind of notice these suspicious donations as well. So again, another accountability and transparency bill, and we'd urge a favorable report. Thank you.
On this bill. Okay, Charlie Cooper. No Charlie Cooper today? Okay, any questions for Ms. Antoine? Going once? No, okay. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the public hearing for House Bill 1352. Madam Chair.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you for taking over, starting from my bill. To members, we're probably voting twice this week. I think Wednesday, maybe in the early evening, and Friday. There are some subcommittees meeting tomorrow, and those bills will be on Wednesday evening's agenda, and the things that are voted on Thursday and Friday will be on our voting agenda. I don't know the exact time yet. I think it's possible we're in double sessions the next 2 days, but I still want to make sure that we get our work done. Tomorrow we have no hearings, so it is a great day for any subcommittee that hasn't scheduled yet. And now that we are near crossover, the 1-day warning is good enough at this point. So if you want to put a list up of some bills, if you haven't already, that is fair game. But I know that some subcommittees have already scheduled. Delegate Washington?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Education Subcommittee will meet tomorrow at 12 o'clock. And I want to just thank Delegate Wilkins for her allowing us to meet at 12 o'clock tomorrow. So thank you.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate Barnes.
Local revenues will be meeting Thursday at 12:30 to go over about 5 bills.
All right, thank you. Delegate Patterson?
We don't have a meeting schedule. We did the marathon last week, but I'm sure we'll have something before the week is out. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Ebersole?
Early childhood would probably meet Friday. I have to see what everybody else is doing to try to find a place to squeeze us in, but we might have as many as 5 or 6 bills to discuss and maybe vote on a few.
Okay, great. Delegate Lutke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Revenues meeting twice this week. We have a meeting scheduled for 3 to 4 p.m. on Wednesday and 12 to 12:45 on Thursday.
And Delegate Wilkins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For election law, we are meeting tomorrow. We're going to push our meeting back to 1:30 p.m. So I want to make sure we'll send an email out, but want to make sure everyone in election law knows that we will be pushing the meeting back 1 hour to accommodate a conflict there. So 12:30 p.m. tomorrow. We will also meet on Thursday at 12:45 p.m. So we'll be meeting twice, and you should, and we'll have the updated message in your emails. Thank you.
Thank you for those lovely emails that you do send, Delegate Wilkins. And
Madam Chair.
When this comes up, the staff puts it all on the General Assembly website, so all that should be up over the next couple hours. Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry about that. I just want to let folks know that we are meeting again this week. We didn't meet today. We're meeting tomorrow, and we'll meet right after the public hearing on Thursday. That's the Education Subcommittee will meet after the public hearing on Thursday.
And we have fewer bills Thursday, though. Clearly 17 bills does not necessarily mean we're having a long hearing, but we do have a much fewer bills on Thursday. And there could still be a bill hearing next week. I think Delegate Washington, Mr. Vice Chair, the virtual education bill is out now.
Yes, we should have a public hearing on that bill after I find some way to get it out of rules.
I'm sure you'll be okay. And that's something that's, I believe, jointly assigned between appropriations and Ways and Means. So that's likely next Monday or Tuesday next week. So that is coming up on our otherwise no hearing for next week. So thanks to the analysts for giving us some clear days. All right. Anything else for the good of the group?
Madam Chair, I just want to say thank you to you for organizing our public hearings on Zoom this year. I don't know when we finished this early before, but I just want to recognize your leadership for this. So it's been pretty great. So, and I'm not sucking up everybody, just Spitting a fact.
Anybody want to say me too at this point? Because
Me
Thank you.
too.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I want to give everyone on the committee a chance, but I also feel very strongly about giving the people who want to testify. And I think just about every other committee has limited that time, and we have not yet. And so I feel like that's the right way to go. We're people this year, and I think that's fantastic. So thank you. And thanks to the staff, of course, for making that possible. Those first two meetings, delegates weren't showing up from other committees, but that's now a well-oiled machine. So that's been working well too. All right, Sarah or Haley, we can stop the YouTube channel.